Well, hi there, folks. This is the second part of our lesson today. The first part was solving by graphing. Second part is the applications of quadratic equations. So basically what I'm going to do is we're going to go through these word problems and I'm going to set them up for you and then you're going to solve them. So if you wanted to, you could just pause the video right now and try to set these problems up on your own, then come back and watch the video and see how it was set up and then solve them. It's your call. The first thing we have here is a number plus its square is 132. It says to create an equation and to solve it to find all possible numbers that satisfy the equation. So we're looking at this. It says a number, so that's going to be my variable, plus means plus, its square, its is referring back to this number, so it's the same thing, but it's going to be squared. Is means equals 132. So we need a variable. Well, I'm going to use k. K is our number. So if I translate the equation up here, I have a number, which is k, and its square, k squared, is 132. So that's all we have to do to write that. Now you want to solve it. You can solve it by using graphing. You can solve it by using the quadratic formula. You can solve it by factoring. But no matter what you do, you have to get it equal to 0. Okay? And I'm just going to write the quadratic formula on here for those of you who choose to do the quadratic formula, which is what we did class before this. Or I'm sorry, that was Valentine's Day, so the class before that. So if you want to use the quadratic formula, you can. If you want to graph it, you can. If you want to factor, you can. All right, so let's set up number 2. It says the product is the answer to a multiplication problem of 2 consecutive integers. Consecutive integers means one right after the other, like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are consecutive. -2, -3, -4, -5. Those are consecutive. Is 210. So the hardest part we have to do is figure out what our variable is going to be. And since I said figure out instead of figure out, I think we'll use p. P is our first consecutive integer. Now, don't be like my other classes and tell me that q is the next consecutive one, but rather think about your consecutive integers. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What do I do from one number to get to the next? Well, you add 1. So if the first one is p, then the next one's p plus 1. So that's our second consecutive integer. So it says the product, so p and p plus 1, is equal to 210. So that's our translation. Now you do the math. Get it equal to 0. And you can either solve by graphing, solve with factoring, or solve by the quadratic formula. It's your choice. Number 3 says the product of 2 consecutive odd integers is 195. So we've got product, which again means that's the answer to a multiplication problem. We have 2 consecutive, but this time they're odd integers. So 2 consecutive odd integers. I think we'll start with A, and that's going to be our first consecutive odd integer. So if that's our first consecutive odd integer, well, think about odd numbers. So 1, 3, 5, 7, or you could have -1, -3, -5, in either direction, but to get the next odd, you add 2. So if the first one's a, the next one's a plus 2. So, to find this, it says the product. So we've got a times a plus 2 equals 195. That's all we have to do to translate, and then you can do the math. Get it equal to 0. And you can solve by the quadratic formula, or you can solve by factoring, or you can solve by graphing. Any of those options works. So let's set up number 1. This is geometry. Geometry makes people cry. But it says that the area, the length of each side is the triangle, is the area. It says find the length of each side of the rectangle if the area is 84. So to find area of a rectangle, that's length times width. So one of these is our length, one of these is our width. We're going to multiply those together. And that should equal our area, which is 84. So now you do the math. So you FOIL. Combine like terms. Get it equal to 0, and then you can solve by graphing, or you can solve by factoring, or you can solve with the quadratic formula. Once you get your answer, check it to see if they both work. Then it says to find the dimensions of the triangle below if the total perimeter is 112. Well, to find perimeter, you just add up all of your sides. So we have x squared plus 3x minus 1 plus 4x minus 7 equals 112. It's all set up. Now you just do your math.
Mr. Dyer, if you're...
So, combine like terms, then you get it equal to 0, and you could either solve by factoring, solve by graphing, or the quadratic formula. And again, once you get your answers, make sure they work, because we can't have negative lengths of the sides of a shape. Number 1 says the width of a rectangular painting is 9 inches longer than its length. The total area is 112 inches. Find the dimensions of the painting. Well, earlier today someone said draw a rectangle. So I drew my rectangle. It says the width of a rectangular painting is 9 inches longer than its length. So if my length is L, then my width is L plus 9, because it's 9 inches longer than the length. So to find the area, I multiply my dimensions. Get it equal to 0, and you can solve by graphing, or you can solve by factoring, or you can solve by the quadratic formula. And again, check your answers to make sure that your sides make sense. Now these last two, it says a rock is dropped off a cliff. The height of the rock from the bottom of the cliff is represented by the quadratic equation h equals negative 16t squared plus 400. It's kind of written awkwardly because the negative went onto a different line. So there's my equation. It says, what's the height after 3.4 seconds? Well, 3.4 seconds, that means I'm going to let t equal 3.4. So h of 3.4 equals negative 16 times 3.4 squared plus 400. I can type that all on my calculator, and I believe it's 215.04 feet. For part B, it says, when does the rock hit the ground? So this time we're looking for t. So it tells us to let h equal 0. So this time h is 0. So that means 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 400. And you can solve that either by using the quadratic formula, graphing, or factoring. I'll leave that to you. If you do the quadratic formula, a is negative 16, b is 0, and c is 400. For part C, this time it wants to know how long it takes so that the rock is 200 feet from the bottom. So this time our height is going to be 200. And again, once you've got that written out, you can get it equal to 0. And you can use the quadratic formula, or you can factor, or you can graph it. Okay? And last problem is same type of problem. An object is thrown upward from the top of a building with 80 meters with a velocity of 64 meters per second. The height of the object after t seconds is given by this equation. Find the height after t equals 1 and t equals 3. So plug it in. So you do it once for h of 1 and once for h of 3. So we've got negative 16 times 1 squared plus 64 times 1 plus 80. Negative 16 times 1 squared, times 3 squared, plus 64 times 3, plus 80. Type those in your calculator and compare. So then it says, when does the object hit the ground? Well, that's when h equals 0. And again, set your h equal to 0. And you can solve by factoring, the quadratic formula, or graphing. The last one says, how long does it take so that the object is 36 meters from the bottom? So that means our height is 36. Get it equal to 0. And then you can solve by graphing, by factoring, or the quadratic formula. So again, make sure you answer all these questions, this practice, and then you can come back on It's Learning and check your answers.